And we're live.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to a new series of Socialist Action webcasts in the fall of 2022. My name is Elizabeth Weiss, and I'm the Federal Treasurer of Socialist Action, a member of the NDP Socialist Caucus Steering Committee, a past Secretary of the Toronto and York Region Labour Council, and a retired member of the Canadian Union of Postal Workers. We acknowledge that this event is taking place on Indigenous lands across Turtle Island, known as North America. That includes the unceded territories of the Mississauga of the New Credit, the Wendat, and Haudenosaunee people in a place called Toronto. We join in the fight for justice, recognizing that there can be no real reconciliation without restitution. That entails seizing the assets of the big resource corporations and returning them to the commons. Tonight's topic is the Liberal-NDP Pact good for workers? With former NDP MLA Marianne Cerilli in Winnipeg, Stephen Crozier, past president of the New Westminster and District Labour Council, Toronto, Barry Weisleder, chair of the NDP Socialist Caucus. What distinguishes the New Democratic Party from the Liberal Party of Canada? As the pact that keeps the federal Liberal minority government in power deliver the goods for workers? Or as the confidence and supply agreement just given Justin Trudeau a free hand? What should members of the NDP and affiliated unions do to advance the interests of the working class? The federal NDP will hold a convention in Winnipeg in June 2023, where this issue will likely be prominent. Now, let's hear from our first speaker. Marianne Cerilli began her career as a health educator in sports, fitness, and recreation leadership. Taking on various roles in government, community, and education, she brings together diverse sector knowledge and community networks. Marianne has been a government employee, a high school guidance counselor, a member of the Legislative Assembly of Manitoba, a community development worker, a community organizer, as well as a college instructor and university contract facility. Marianne was elected in 1990 and served through 2003 as the NDP MLA for Radisson. So welcome, Marianne.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for hosting this and including me. I appreciate it. There sure is a lot going on to talk about, including, this ongoing agreement between the NDP and the governing Liberal Party in the federal Parliament. And I guess I'll start off my comments by just sort of talking about the way that I'm responding to that, or trying to make sense of the thinking behind the NDP doing something like that at this time. And we were asked as part of the panel to kind of give our response. And on the one hand, I actually not necessarily opposed to some kind of collaboration between political parties. I think some of the thinking on this is to try and keep the Conservatives out, and they tried to make hay initially of the this agreement with the Liberals, and saying that it was undemocratic and it was not reflective of what happened in the election. But I think that that's part of it, is to deal with the fact that we have this exceedingly more and more right-wing opposition parties in the opposition and in the Parliament. And I think that collaboration can get things done. And I actually really I'm doing a lot of work right now on collaborative governance. And I think that there's a whole new theory of change, especially at the municipal level of politics, using collaborative governance and also more participatory budgets. So I think those two go hand in hand. But when I look at this agreement, I think part of it is that this has also just bought the NDP some time, that they are broke, that they spent way more money in the last federal election and didn't see the results for it. So this agreement to not defeat the governing Liberals is is allowing them to have some time to rebuild financially and get ready to fight another election. Some of the concerns I have about it, though, is they sold the farm. They gave up way too much and got too little in terms of 2 days, I think, after it was announced that there was this new agreement. There was then an announcement of more military spending, and the NDP kind of just went along with that. So if they've lost their ability to be critical and to distinguish themselves and to take positions that may be difficult positions to take, especially given what's going on now with the ongoing conflict with NATO and Ukraine and Russia. So, to have only gotten some vague commitments on a couple of social policy planks or programs in exchange for the kind of support that they're giving. And I think it's part of also just sort of a drift in procedure in the NDP. And we're seeing that all across the country, everything from what happened with the decision on Angeli's candidacy to become the new premier in BC, the Alberta NDP going after the Conservatives for comments they made about the situation with the western part of Ukraine being more comfortable in Russia, and them going on the attack and demanding an apology for what essentially could be an NDP position. And then something else that's come up in Manitoba, where I actually have the link that I could put in the chat for an article that was written by a retired professor at the University of Winnipeg, John Ryan, that outlines sort of a history of Russia, Ukraine, and NATO, and trying to explain that wasn't an as the media says every time they talk about it, this wasn't an unprovoked Russian attack, that there was the Minsk agreement, there was all this other history in place that is being ignored. And, the war is being covered like a sporting event where there's no real political analysis in history. It's just, about finding bodies and where the attacks are happening, and there's no context. And it's like, that whole, if you're either with us or against us, and there's the good guys and the bad guys. And it's a very dangerous kind of way of controlling what people are going to believe about what's going on. And what has happened is, in Manitoba, this article that was in a magazine called Ethnorama by John Ryan was picked up in a column in the National Post. And the Ukrainian-Canadian Congress has been pressuring the NDP to pull their support for this little magazine. And they capitulated, and they did. And it's now the MPs, Leah Gazan and Daniel Blakey, have been told that they should no longer support this magazine. And there's a real concern that, particularly Leah Gazan, she ran as a socialist and got the nomination to be the MP for the area where I live. And I asked myself, what is a socialist position on the conflict in the Ukraine? What's a progressive position? What's a politically aware position and to take? And are we taking that position? And are we trying to, support an educated and historically relevant position? So those are some of the comments that I can make to start off. I was going to show a few slides. I'm doing a lot of work right now too. I've just launched a shopping cart on my website where I'm selling some of my tools that I've created, and I've developed what I'm calling the politics of unity, which is and I've got a series of principles that we can articulate a politics on the left that is not just about policy, but is also about a political process that is, I guess what I'm trying to do is, I appreciate the sort of revolutionary aspects in history of this group and other socialist groups, but what I'm trying to do is bring conflict resolution theory and practice, restorative practice, reconciliation practice into politics. And I think the polarization that's going on in politics, I think the undermining of democracy, the cancel culture, the social bullying, and the weaponization of procedure, like we've seen in BC and other places, I think it's really calling out for us to reinvent our political tools, our political structures and procedures, because what we're using are colonial tools that were designed hundreds of years ago, and they're creating a container in politics that's preventing us from doing the things on climate change and on equity and on finance that we need to do. And that's sort of work that I can do as someone who's political, but I can do that talking about electoral politics, but also talking about small p politics that we all experience every day in the groups that we work in, on the boards that we're on. And so I'll leave it at that, if I've used my time to kind of frame out a little bit of where I'm coming from. And I look forward to hearing others and questions from the group. Oh, you're muted, Elizabeth.
You're right, I am. So no, you have ample time left, but it's okay. So we're going to move on now to our next speaker, Barry Weisleder, who is a writer, editor, union organizer, and retired secondary school teacher based in Toronto. He is the co-chair of the NDP Socialist Caucus, a leading member of the Municipal Socialist Alliance, a founder of the Workers' Action Movement, and the political producer of SA webcasts. Barry is the federal secretary of Socialist Action League for Action Socialists. Welcome, Barry.
Good evening, comrades and friends, sisters and brothers. I appreciate Marianne's opening comments. I may touch on some of those points in this presentation or in our dialogue with the questions that come in. Let's begin with what set the scene for the Pact. NDP leader Jagmeet Singh found a way to avoid a federal election and to gain a vague promise of health service reforms. But this came at the cost of huge increases in military spending. The Liberal-NDP deal paved the way for Justin Trudeau to stay in power until 2025, at least. It strives for political stability in the relentless march to climate catastrophe, growing social inequality, and the horrors of inter-imperialist war. The Confidence and Supply Agreement has the NDP supporting the minority government Liberals in confidence votes, including 4 federal budgets, one of which we've seen, in exchange for non-specific statements of good intention toward NDP-friendly policies until June 2025. The Prime Minister said the deal was about, quote, improving the way we do politics, quote, while still making room for debate and disagreement rather than, quote, compromising the core beliefs, quote, of either party. Right-wing critics of the Pact decry even the possibility that Trudeau may bend a little towards NDP priorities and start spending on urgent social needs. Nothing in Trudeau's past indicates any such proclivity on his part. We only have to remember his policy for proportional representation. Left-wing critics must wonder whether the NDP, quote, core beliefs include party democracy. I say this in the wake of the BC NDP executive decision yesterday to disqualify the candidacy of Anjali Appadurai for BC NDP leader. I trust that Stephen will have more to say on this subject. Back to the federal pact. The following are the gains touted by Jagmeet Singh in a 2021 e-message to NDP members. Expanded public dental care to deliver better health outcomes for Canadians. A pharmacare plan to ensure access to the meds that people need. anti-scab legislation that protects striking workers, a plan to advance affordable housing as a human right, especially for Indigenous communities, and just transition legislation to help tackle the climate crisis and create good-paying jobs. Except for an income-based national dental care program to be phased in over 3 years, that's if the provinces agree to participate, the language of the deal is purely aspirational. The pact itself is non-binding. Although slated to last until 2025, either party can opt out at will. In addition, the pact promises, quote, investments in the COVID-ravaged healthcare system, continuing progress on a universal pharmacare program, moving forward, these are all in quotations, on tax reform, developing plans to phase out subsidies for the fossil fuel sector, advancing measures to achieve significant emissions reductions by 2030, a significant additional investment in Indigenous housing. What the hell does significant mean? Well, you get the picture. 3 years of stable government may look good to a public battered by COVID, price shocked at the gas pump and at the grocery store, and facing the prospect of World War Armageddon brewing in Ukraine. And if the whole thing goes south, some say we are no worse off than before the deal. But is that true? Of the two leaders, Justin Trudeau absolutely gained the most. Trudeau gets to implement his agenda without rolling the dice on every confidence vote. That means that difficult decisions like billions more for everything from pipelines to fighter jets and Navy frigates can be implemented without risk of triggering an election. It also casts the Prime Minister as a conciliator, someone who can reach across the aisle and work with MPs in another caucus. Jagmeet Singh, on the other hand, has taken on the role of riverboat gambler. In return for supporting a minority government, as several NDP leaders have done in the past, he hopes to appear to punch far above the weight of the 25 seats he won in 2021. Let's remember, that was quite a few seats fewer than he had before, and yet he declared the outcome a victory. So take dental care. Trudeau took a pass on that policy in the last election. Now he's signed on to it, giving Singh a chance to take some political credit for it. Things could be even better if Singh if other items on the NDP wish list were adopted by the government. Just don't hold your breath. Which means that this is all a big gamble for Singh. For that reason, former NDP leader Thomas Mulcair told CTV he would not have signed the cooperation agreement with the Liberals. And, Mulcair is not the most radical leader the NDP has ever had. This deal is more co-optation than cooperation. The Liberals are the masters of identity theft, usually at the NDP's expense. If the NDP sticks with the Liberals until 2025 and does not get the credit for things like a national dental care program, its candidates will be faced at the doorstep with a tough question. How can the NDP ask to replace the Liberals after spending 3 years propping them up? That's the question. What's the alternative? Vote for legislation that is good for workers. That's the alternative. Vote against laws that are bad. Let the opposition parties prop up or bring down the government and bear the consequences. When it's close, squeeze the Liberals to get the most for the working class. Underlying all the froth on the surface is a basic fact. Jagmeet Singh made an extended deal with the devil. He guaranteed that warmonger, strikebreaker, and fossil fuel promoter Justin Trudeau stays in power for 3 more years in exchange for the promise of a means-tested, slowly phased-in dental care service and a few statements of good intentions from a living scion of the ruling class. Singh may well get nothing for his sellout. The Liberals will enjoy the advantage of NDP endorsement to do whatever they want, like the Emergencies Act that Trudeau invoked in mid-February. Worse, this deal says to the working class that it's okay to unite with a boss party against the workers. Singh has once again demonstrated his naive belief that the difference between the NDP and the Liberals is just, a few ideas, that NDPers are just Liberals in a hurry, which appears to be true for the privileged middle-class leadership of the NDP. But the founding of the NDP in 1961 as a party based on labor unions and the Canadian Labour Congress was a big step forward for the working class. It was the creation of an independent political arm. It is a partial break with big business parties and Bay Street. The NDP should be based on Main Street, on the working class, women, impoverished, racialized, and oppressed folks. Such a mass labor party does not exist in the United States, but we have one. Whatever they may claim about ruling in the interest of the people of Canada, all the other political parties represent the bosses, the capitalists, the fossil fuel industry, the mine owners, the arms industries, giant telecoms, big pharma, retail chain empires, and mega manufacturers and loan sharks and the banks. That's what they represent. And that includes the Green Party, which claims to be neither left nor right and is on the path to political self-destruction. Singh has voted for increases in war budgets and war profits. He backs wars in which working class families die or become refugees. If Trudeau hits the NATO military spending target of 2% of gross domestic product in the federal budget, that means increasing military spending by $16 billion in a single year, up from the current spending of more than $26 billion this year. Singh's commitment to provide the Liberals with confidence and supply implies endorsement for beefing up the Canadian forces to participate in NATO wars as Ottawa did in Afghanistan, the Balkans, and Libya. It provides lethal aid to Nazi-led battalions battering the Donbass and weapons to the Saudi monarchy pulverizing Yemen, sending military vehicles and backing a new UN occupation of Haiti as I speak, and boosting the Israeli apartheid state. It means upholding moves by Trudeau to complete the TMX pipeline and to continue underfunding healthcare and ignoring the needs of Indigenous people. In 2021, Canada spent 15 times more money on the Department of Defense than on the Department of the Environment and Climate Change. $29.3 billion against $1.7 billion on climate change. The Department of Defense, there's a misnomer, contributes to 50% of the federal government's greenhouse gas emissions, making it the federal government's biggest emitter by far. To make matters worse, military emissions are exempt from the federal greenhouse gas emissions reduction target. You know that? To meet NATO's obligations, Canada commits to spending $77 billion on purchasing and operating 88 new fighter jets as part of NATO. Canada participated in the illegal bombing of Yugoslavia in 1999, the invasion and occupation of Afghanistan, 2001-2014, and the Canada-led bombing campaign of Libya in 2011. Apart from the United States, Canada sells more weapons to Saudi Arabia than any other country, despite the bloody Saudi-led invasion of Yemen. Singh has once again crossed the class line and betrayed the working people of Canada. He has done this for a non-universal dental plan and for boss promises of sunny ways and no specifics. Singh and the bulk of the NDP leadership simply support capitalism, even though they rest on the organized working class, which is exploited under this system. The leadership is a living contradiction. They are right-wing social democrats, a gaggle of opportunists and careerists who seem incapable of change. They have to go. At the NDP federal convention slated for Winnipeg next June, they must be held to account and removed. To win the working class to socialism, it is necessary to expose and dispose of its current misleaders. Our task is to build the socialist left in the NDP and the unions to fight for socialist policies and for a class struggle leadership. Sorry, I'm not for reconciliation. I'm for fanning the flames of discontent, like the Wobblies say. Today, the world is headed towards rack and ruin. Urgently needed is a movement that knows the difference between workers and bosses, one that knows on which side we should stand. Thanks very much. Look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Mary. Okay, our next speaker is Stephen Crozier. He is the immediate past president of New Westminster and District Labour Council and the past vice president of negotiations with the Douglas College Faculty Association. He was the NDP candidate for MP in South Surrey, White Rock in 2019, the president of Democracy Direct Society in White Rock, and a teacher for over 30 years. He retired last fall. Stephen is a member of Socialist Action, the NDP Socialist Caucus, the Socialist Unity Assembly, and the White Rock City Housing Advisory Committee. He is the Richmond Delta Surrey area represented on the BC NDP Standing Committee on Environment and Economy. Goodness, Stephen, it's a good job you're retired. Welcome. Go ahead, Stephen.
Yes, and sometimes I just feel tired, not retired. So I want to start off by saying that I am coming to you from the unceded stolen territory of the Semiahmoo First Nation and the broader Coast Salish people. And of course, the city is sometimes called White Rock. I want to say that we have actually established a better relationship with our Indigenous neighbors, and that's something that I'm very proud of here in White Rock. We raised the Indigenous, the Semiahmoo First Nation flag, and it will continue to fly at City Hall, and I hope that we can continue that initiative and work together. So the topic of the day is the Singh-Trudeau Alliance good for working people, and I've distilled that into, is giving up your political power a smart move? Because I think that's exactly what the NDP did. So if you read the agreement, I mean, it's almost laughable, and it's probably a belly laugh if you're a liberal. And this is it, word for word, okay, the crux of the matter. The agreement will mean that the NDP agrees to support the government on confidence and budgetary matters, notably on budgetary policy, budget implementation bills, estimates and supply, and that the Liberal Party commits to govern for the duration of the agreement. So if we take a look at that, what does it mean? Put simply, the NDP agrees to support the Liberal government, and the Liberal government agrees to govern. What did we get there? Does the NDP not realize that the Liberal government is already governing? I mean, it truly is ridiculous. They gave up nothing, we gave up everything. So following the relinquishing of their power, then the NDP came up with a wish list. And I think that they should realize that Justin Trudeau is not Santa Claus, and the Liberal MPs are not busy little elves. So unsurprisingly, to this point, the NDP workers' stocking is still empty. The time for the completion of the first phases of the agreement is coming, but so is Christmas. Back to the question, is the Alliance good for working people? The NDP is the Labour Party, the only one in North America. They represent workers. The Liberal Party is a bourgeois party. How can it possibly be good for workers when their party gives up the power to represent them to a bourgeois party? And I think we all know the answer to that. And I guess I could end the talk here, but I'm told I've got a little bit more time, so we'll delve into this a little bit more deeply. So before we get into the details, so I want to put it into terms of negotiating for a union with management. And this would be the kind of agreement that a union would sign with management before they go into negotiating their next contract. And let me take the words from the agreement between the NDP and the Liberals and put it into this context. This agreement between management and the union will mean that the union agrees to support management on anything that threatens their ability to manage, and management commits to managing for the duration of the collective agreement. That is basically the same agreement put into union management terms. So obviously the union is abandoning their membership in precisely the same way as the NDP has abandoned the working people of Canada. And why have we done that? Well, supposedly, I would say that the union might do such a thing because they don't have the money for job action. And the NDP does not have the funds to fight an election right now. But what are the results of this? I mean, if you're a union, what's going to happen is you're going to bleed membership. People do not want to belong to a union that is that useless. And I'm telling you, the NDP is bleeding membership, and they are also bleeding funds. They're not going to be putting money in those coffers if they don't take some sort of action on behalf of the working people of Canada. Another passage which Barry brought up is this idea that, we're not going to compromise core beliefs. Oh dear. And so what exactly are the beliefs that we have in common with a bourgeois party? If we're not going to be compromising, what are those beliefs? What are those core values? So I just took a look a little bit more at, and I'm going to analyze, and some of this will be repeating from what Barry said, but if we start at health care, so first there is a proposal for a dental plan. And I often say that this plan begins with little teeth and it ends with very few. And it is restricted to families whose incomes are under $90,000 a year. And unless you're under $70,000 a year, it's a co-payment plan. What is universal about this? As NDPers, we believe in universal health care, and this is far from it. So furthermore, they'll continue to progress towards towards a universal national pharmacare program. Let's just say that snails are faster than the Liberals, and it seems as though the NDP are going to go about the same pace on this particular issue as the Liberals have gone in the past, which is basically nowhere. If this is their goal, yeah, I'll just drop that. Oh, yes. The final thing is that they will table a safe long-term care act. And in my language, when you table something, it means you're putting it off. That's something the Liberals do very well. And I don't think they should be doing these things at the expense or with the support of the NDP. Next, they'll make life more affordable by doing such things as extending the rapid housing initiative. To be honest, I didn't even know there was a rapid housing initiative. And they also said that they will, I mean, I guess it's going at such a pace, I can't see it even. But they also want to pretend that 80% of unaffordable rents, okay, so the average market rents, 80% of unaffordable rents are affordable. What kind of a policy is that that we would agree to? They also will implement a home buyer's bill of rights. And what I would suggest is that they implement the UN Declaration on Human Rights, which includes the right to housing, whether you own it or you rent it. There is a right to housing, which Canada signed in 1948. So before we start making promises that we'll break in the future, maybe we could catch up with our past and put those things into action. The only thing that I see here that is helpful is the Early Learning and Childcare Act. But what would be most helpful is things that Barry mentioned as well, is the things that are missing here. And one would be, and I heard this term for the first time yesterday, I think, greedflation. It's not inflation that we are suffering under right now. It is greedflation. And they could, if they want to make things more affordable for Canadians, they could maybe take some steps to counter what that is. There is the idea of a better deal for workers, which, as Barry mentioned again, sorry, I'm going over a lot of what he's mentioned, but 10 days sick leave and disallowing scabs for federally regulated workers and in federally regulated industries. How much is that? And will they even do it? I mean, it's really questionable. But I mean, it's not going anywhere. This is supposed to be a better deal for workers. It sounds like a pretty good deal for corporations to me. And when it comes to reconciliation, there's all these things: making, accelerating, creating, providing, when what they should be doing is just fully implementing the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. Of course, they've already broken that promise. They made it, yes, we're going to do it, and then they don't do it, which, geez, makes you think of the Liberals, and now the NDP are buying right into what that is. So I guess it's just time to pretend something new. One of the most humorous ones, and albeit it's dark humor, is this section on which is entitled "A Fair Tax System." So first they are, and I quote, "moving forward in a near term on tax changes on financial institutions who have made strong profits during the pandemic. So first of all, what does near term mean? And secondly, why pick on the banks? Why not include oil and gas companies, real estate developers, food suppliers, all of the price gougers that are causing greedflation? What about taxing the top 20 billionaires who increased their wealth by an astonishing $78 billion during the first year of the pandemic while the economy stood still and workers lost their jobs? Finally, they will implement, and again I quote, a publicly accessible beneficial ownership registry by the end of 2023. And I gather this is so that we will know exactly who is screwing us. And moving on, finally, they're going to make democracy work for people by fiddling with the voting process. They do not realize that people don't want to vote for them because they are not working for the working people. So changing the voting and making it more available to people is not going to make anything more democratic. You need democratic policies. You need policies that support workers and working families. We don't need new systems. Well, actually, we could use proportional representation, but this is just fiddling on the outside of things. It doesn't make any sense. So in short, the proposals seem to me to be liberal promises, the same sort of thing that the liberals run on every election before gaining power and then ruling from the right. Did the NDP have a hand in this at all? And I say, yes, of course they did. Their hands were like this, up in surrender. They surrendered from the very beginning. And so we, and I just suggest here that were the NDP in charge of labor negotiations, we would still be working 12-hour days, 7 days a week, and living in slums. So there were some other questions here. What distinguishes the New Democratic Party from the Liberal Party of Canada? The Liberal Party is in power. The NDP relinquished its power. Has the Pact that keeps the federal Liberal and minority government in power delivered the goods for workers? No. Or has the confidence and supply agreement just given Justin Trudeau a free hand? Yes. What should the members of the NDP and affiliated unions do to advance the interests of workers? Well, this requires a bit of a longer answer. Perhaps it's because I'm a retired teacher, but I think the first thing that comes to mind for me is education. Workers have to understand that capitalism is quite literally killing them. Union leadership continues to operate in a way that supports corporate capitalism and continues to pushing us all closer to the climate crisis cliff. Like the NDP brass, they want to maintain power, however little it is, and not use it. Also, like the NDP, who go to the Liberals for crumbs, so they go to their corporate masters. I heard a leader of the Labour, unfortunately it was my Labour Council, in fact, say, we don't want the whole pie, just our fair share. This was said to International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers who have been locked out by the company Ledcor for 3 years while scabs do their work and get their pay. I immediately said, you're damn right we want the whole pie. What is the fair share of a pie for capitalists? We bake the pie, we grow the ingredients, we manufacture, and we deliver the pie. Where do the capitalists come in here? What is their fair share? They'd be lucky to get the crumbs as far as I'm concerned. So labor and any labor leader or union member or any NDP leader or member who does not begin with that understanding is not worth the salt ground to put in the pie. And maybe I'll move on here. So educating workers about socialism and this understanding is fundamental. The second, beyond education, is infiltration. And I really hope that the Workers' Action Movement continues their expansion into unions. And this too, of course, is about education. Third, as always, is solidarity. The enemy of the enemy is my friend. but recognizing that revolutionary socialists, those that will wrest the political and economic power from the capitalists and place it in the hands of workers where it belongs, are the closest friends of all. And solidarity begins with us. So now I want to speak a little bit about BC and what's happening here. Broadening our impact, working with other groups, eco-socialist. We've worked with eco-socialists under the umbrella of Socialist Unity Assembly, albeit it is with limited success. However, we've got 1 minute remaining, and so I'm just going to move on to Anjali Appadurai, who was just rejected from the BC NDP leadership and from becoming the possibility of becoming Premier BC. The NDP executive rejected her application, but that train has left the station. All we have to do is keep it on track. I doubt the NDP leadership has any idea how big the mistake they just made is, because they tend to be too busy patting each other on the back rather than more appropriately kicking each other's backsides. The next election is at stake right now, and they want to play coronation. I'd like to end with a new take on an old saying: when life gives you lemons, take aim and fire back as fast and as hard as you can. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Stephen. And also thank you, Marianne and Barry. Before we go to our audience for questions, I would like to remind our listening audience that if you agree with what you've heard or will air during this webcast, please join or at least ask information about Socialist Action. You can just sign up at our website, www.socialistaction.ca, or you can call 647-986-1917. It's very easy to remember. 1917 was the Russian Revolution. Okay, so we're going to go to Dave, our our technical producer, and he will put 3 questions to our panelists, and you can also read them in the chat. You will have 6 minutes each to answer 1, 2, or 3 questions. It's your choice, and we will start with Barry, then Stephen, and then Marianne. So Dave, go ahead.
The first question comes from Judy Kosh. Why does the NDP leadership take such a bourgeois view on politics? The second question comes from Demand Better Entertainment. What leverage does the federal NDP have when the capitalist media would blame any election on their attempt to hold Liberals accountable, like in 2003 federally and 2014 in Ontario? We need more left media. The third question comes from Hans Modlik. Is corporate profit-driven, unchecked inflation also a byproduct of the NDP tying its hands to the Liberal ship?
Okay, you've heard, and you can read the 3 questions. You have 6 minutes. Barry, we'll start with you. You're muted, Barry.
Yeah, I thought I should unmute. I thought that would facilitate the audio portion of the program. Okay, great question. Thank you very much, Judy and the others. Why does the NDP leadership take such a bourgeois view on politics? Well, because the NDP leadership is petty bourgeois. I mean, it's caught. It's caught between the working class and the corporate elite, the capitalist class. And this is an untenable position, because the petty bourgeoisie will always waver and it will lean towards one side or the other. The sides, the classes, are fundamental in this society. So it's not like you can wish it away or hope that there'll be less conflict between them. It is, ingrained in the capitalist system. It's a struggle over the social surplus. Workers in nature produce everything. And the question is, who will benefit? Will those who produce benefit? And Stephen gave an excellent description of this tug of war. Who will benefit and who will rule? So the interests of the majority, which implies that it's a democratic question as well, is that the majority should benefit. But unfortunately, the NDP leadership consists of lawyers and doctors and engineers and self-employed small entrepreneurs. There's no big businesses that support the NDP, and scarcely any daily newspapers support the NDP, which is also interesting from a class point of view. But the view comes from this intermediate class that is trying to reconcile the interests of the main contending classes in society. And reconcile means subordinate, because one rules and the other one delivers the labor and the goods. And subordination to the ruling class means climate crisis, it means wars, it means millions and soon hundreds of millions of refugees in an unlivable planet, loss of species, cities sinking under the waves. It's estimated that in the next 10, 15 years, major coastal cities are going to have to retreat, and half their population will be unable to reside where they do now. And I, for one, I'm going to miss New York. I love that place. So that's why such a bourgeois view prevails. Demand better entertainment. I'm all for that. What leverage does the federal NDP have when the media would blame any election on their attempt to hold the Liberals accountable, like in 03 and 14 in Ontario? We need more left media. Well, the NDP shouldn't rely on the corporate media. It should tell the truth in all things, big and small, and recognize that the corporate media is not going to give a fair shake. They're going to try to distort the truth. And now the media is multiple in character across the internet and other social media. So we need more left media. I couldn't agree more. We need left media. What does that mean? We used to agitate in the Socialist Caucus and Socialist Left that Labor should get together and launch a daily newspaper. Well, maybe now it would take the form of, electronic media, but it would combine the resources. So the breach wouldn't have to come out and beg for, for tens and 20s and $100 bills. Tyee wouldn't have to beg. The equivalent, Now Magazine or in Winnipeg and other cities, the left press would have the backing of the labor movement and the NDP, and it would offer an alternative to the corporate view that prevails in the dominant media. I think we should continue that campaign, whatever form the media ought to take. I think we should campaign for more left media and for the unions and the NDP to take responsibility. And that doesn't mean simply conveying the point of view of those who dominate working class institutions, but opening it up so that people can have their say, ask critical questions, give unconventional explanations with society. Is the corporate profit-driven unchecked inflation also a byproduct of the NDP tying its hands to the Liberal ship? Well, to ask the question is to answer the question. Yes. There are problems with the supply chain, and the pandemic has had an impact. So we don't want to be simplistic, but the truth is that immense mega billion profits are being made by corporations that simply are doing it because they can. And with the NDP tying its hands or tying its vessel to the Liberal ship makes it more difficult for the NDP to demand changes to the budget, because they've agreed to adopt the budget, to support the budget, including on war spending. But I devoted a lot of attention to that in my presentation. So just in terms of what the grocery chains are doing to demand price controls, to demand a big wealth tax. Hundreds of thousands of workers demonstrated in Paris, France, just a few days ago, demanding two things: one, wage catch-up, and two, an excess profit tax to be plowed back into society to help a struggling healthcare system and a crumbling infrastructure. So that's what we're in favor of seeing. Thank you.
Okay, Stephen.
Sure.
Oh, I thought I was next.
Oh,
No, it
Oh.
was Barry, Stephen, and Marianne.
I'll try
Go ahead,
not to say
Stephen.
too much. I'll try not to say too much, Marianne. I got to give you a chance too. So, all right. I just,
You'll all
I'll
get
just.
your chances.
Yes, I know. I think Barry really answered the first question from Judy Kosh very well. So I don't think I'd add anything much to that. But I guess I'd have to say that we're also in a kind of very much a bourgeois society, and that's unfortunate. And this is why I think that we have to go back to this idea of education. I mean, wow, man, we're losing it. We're losing the battle in terms of informing people or letting people know what their true situation is. So we have a support for bourgeois parties, even within our with our NDP leadership, bourgeois ideas, because we're living in a bourgeois society that does not give um, the possibility of the political will to make the necessary changes for working people. So this is really what what we're so I guess what I would say is that it goes beyond just the party leadership to the kind of society that we're living in and how we need to change that, and which I think kind of leads into the next question about the media. There, media, various media are forms of communication, and the thing that we don't seem to be doing very well, again, is communicating not just in that mass media sense, but communicating one-on-one with each other through our unions, through our organizations, so that people understand that the mass media is not necessarily their friend. The mass media is not representing them. They're not representing the lives that they're living. It truly is. It's interesting that this is Demand Better Entertainment. I don't know whether that's the person's name, but I mean that's what mass media has become. News is entertainment. What sells? What will get those advertising dollars, and so which tend to be things that are more titillating than actually kind of a grassroots thing. And that's one of the things that I would say to counter some of this. Very true. I mean, we should be getting more left media, but there are many more of us, many more working class than there are of the capitalists. And it seems to me as though we are not maximizing our power of communication, which should be one-on-one as well as through mass media. The final question here is corporate. Yeah. Well, this is, obviously this is true, but I'd like to start back a little bit because what has allowed this corporate control? And you have to go back, I think, at least to the 1980s, if not before, where we had globalization. And the globalization was driven by corporations and by the wealthy. And so this is something that has allowed the present situation to exist. If you go back, this is where unions should have been internationalizing, working with workers throughout the world in different countries, so that they were not exploited. When you have that exploitation, all of a sudden you lose control over your own existence because you didn't take control over the global existence, the global powers that are now exerting themselves on our lives. The futurists back in the late 70s, early 80s had a thing of, I've said this many times, so I apologize for those who have heard it, but that we were supposed to think globally and act locally. And what we did was we acted globally without thinking locally. We didn't think about our neighbors. We didn't think about other members in our unions, in our communities. Basically, globalization, where labor and environmental rules were totally left out, left off of the table. All of those things were left out, and we lost control. And so this has led through the 90s and the 2000s that we're in now to a situation where I think a lot of people have just sort of given up. So how do we motivate them again? And how do we give them future. And I think particularly for young people, this is a problem. They are disengaged. How do we engage them? So, okay, and that's yeah. I think I'll wind it up there.
Okay, thank you, Marianne.
Well, I guess maybe I'll pick up where Stephen left off in talking about number 3 and this sort of corporate state that we have now, that governments are so aligned with the corporate sector and corporate globalization and deregulation, privatization, that whole agenda, tax cuts. And that really did start with the Reagan-Thatcher era and free trade. And the way I always look at it, it was also at the same time that the Brundtland Commission and this notion of sustainable development was percolating. And the Brundtland Commission's view of sustainability is still pretty corporate, but that notion of creating an economy that doesn't exploit people or the planet, kind of was developed, was kind of catching hold, and the corporate parties were able to bring in free trade and take the world in an entirely different direction, which is now we're in this late stage of capitalism where things are collapsing. Things are social collapse, ecological collapse, economic collapse. We're in the middle of it. And what I want to go to in terms of the first question is, I guess I disagree a little bit with the language, particularly talking about education. I don't think we need to just focus on education as political activists. We need to figure out how we politicize people. And what are the tools to politicize people, to have them realize what their interests really are and how they can create political organizations that are going to represent their interests. We have all agreed that the NDP is losing that ability to represent the interests and to work and advance the interests of the average working Canadian person. So I think, a political party like the NDP is no longer interested really in politicizing people. If they have an election machine, they want to gain power. They do that by identifying votes. They figure out what's popular. They do that by running popularity polls. And then they take those positions so that they can capture power. And then they try to retain power by continuing to do things that they think are going to keep the other guys out. So they do some tax cuts. They, do things that are going to, in their view, sort of retain their ability to stay in power. And through none of that is there an agenda of politicizing people. So, I'm an adult educator. I've read a lot of work by people like, Paulo Freire and other who come from that liberation theology, who come from, that idea of the work that was done early in Canada to develop co-ops. And it seems like there are, like, just tomorrow I'm at a conference that's here in Winnipeg that is the Community Economic Development Gathering, and it's where we're talking about local community economic development, sustainable economies. We're talking about building co-ops, and that's so small scale right now. And it's kind of like I talk about it. It's like we're going underneath globalization. It's like there's these little seeds being planted, the credit union, the co-op gas station. We have some of these things. We still have some public utilities in our where I come from in Manitoba. But we are in a huge battle with media and the corporate media, but also the CBC. Like, I've stopped listening to CBC. I couldn't stand it anymore. When I'm in the car now, I actually listen to comedy, because if I turn on the CBC, it makes me angry. And I'm concerned that the NDP doesn't hold the media accountable. And again, going back to the coverage of this war, and the bias and the deceit and the misrepresentation that has gone on in Western media to kind of build this popular support for war and for spending more of their money on the military. And I think it's part of that politicization is making those connections. And especially in the United States, where, half of their federal budget is supporting military. So their entire economy relies on war. And people need to understand that this is not about freedom and democracy, or, in Iran, they said, oh, it was about women's rights. It's about oil, and it's about profitability for weapons manufacturing and weapons sales. And that's what we have, this very militarized global economy. And that's what we need to be politicizing people around, in my view, so that they're insisting that just transition is taking money out of defense and policing and war and into housing and food security and healthcare and quality education and childcare and all those things that we need for a sustainable, equitable society. The other thing I was going to say is, I think one of the other big problems on the left is identity politics, which has gone off the deep end. And people are now talking about identity in terms of gender and race, and not their identity as an economic class, whether you call that working class or whatever we call it. And I think that the labor movement has bought into that too. Like, the labor movement needs to figure out how to help workers identify as workers, and not as, whatever, Indigenous and all these other identities. And I've taught a lot in my career about intersectionality and anti-oppression practice, which is trying to intersect, all these things with gender and class and race. But we've lost the class part. We've lost people realizing that their real interests come
wrap up, Marianne, please.
Okay, their interests come from seeing themselves as workers, and not just as consumers, but as workers. And that's part of the spin from the media too. It's all about you as a consumer, and not as us as actors, as workers. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going back to our producer now and this time it will be 4 questions, and he will read them, and they will be in the text, and you can answer 1, 2, 3, or 4, and you still have 6 minutes. Dave?
The first question comes from Yasin Kaya. Do the presenters agree that improving democracy in the NDP is necessary for preventing such disastrous political moves and pacts? The second question comes from Nick Quick. One option I'm hearing is breaking the pact and voting with more left-friendly policies, operating in another minority. Would that not risk a conservative majority after multiple repeat elections? The third question comes from Robert McDiarmid. As Lenin explained, social democracy is nothing else than a euphemism for social imperialism. More so now that the social democracy has universally adopted neoliberal economic policies. The tragedy is that it, along with the unions, are the only mass working class organizations we have. Comment? And the fourth question comes from Betty Jane Antanavicius. What can we do to prevent unelected organizations such as the WHO and WEF from controlling our lives?
Okay, you each have up to 6 minutes, and we'll start with Stephen, then Marianne, then Mary.
Yes. Okay. So in answer to the first question here about the democracy in the NDP being necessary, absolutely. Basically, I would say that the NDP brass is totally disconnected from a lot of the membership. I mean, they connect with the brass of the unions, the big unions, who are also disconnected from their memberships and what it is that people are actually, what their members are living and experiencing every day. So, we really need to move towards the grassroots. That's what democracy is. It's actually the power of the people, not the power of the elites. And if we don't have that, then what you have is elites in one silo making deals with elites in another silo, and really abandoning the people that they are supposed to represent. So yeah, definitely we need more transparency, more openness, more communication. These are also elements of democracy that we need to expand within the NDP. Let me just look at the second one. Operating another minority. Okay, so if I understand what Nick is saying here, it's the idea of us breaking. Okay, one. Um, yeah, I'm not sure that I understand Nick's question exactly. It seems to me that you're suggesting some sort of split of the left that would give the Conservatives a better chance of winning. Yeah, maybe I better pass on that because I'm not quite sure. I mean, I can see that happening if we divide into different parties, and I think that that's something that we have right now, even with some Green members are really quite left-leaning, and if we could capture those and bring them into the NDP, that would make a big difference, especially here in BC. But we do want to be careful that we don't splinter the party more. And I apologize, Nick, but I'm not sure I understand your question very well. That's about all I'll say there. Social democracy. Yeah, so okay. So I think here that, so the next question is about social democracy and the idea that only mass working class organizations we have. Yes. So yeah, so basically if you're negotiating in a bourgeois society, and I think this is one thing that we were talking about earlier, you're limited. You end up having those values even as a laborer, as a worker. You end up with these bourgeois values, and I think that is maybe, Robert, what you're referring to here. How far are you going to get whenever what it is that you value is the same thing as the capitalists? And I think that labor really lost its way whenever it became business labor as opposed to social unionism, which is getting out not just for your own union, but for the good of society, for the good of everyone. And so I think that this is one thing where they lost the moral high ground there, and a lot of, especially the the labor leadership, it tends to be more about maintaining their own power rather than using the power, and that's a big problem. So I hope I've started to answer, or began a little bit answering that question. I think a two-way conversation sometimes is a lot more beneficial. But anyway, what can we do to prevent unelected organizations? Well, I'm not so. I don't really feel that the WHO controls my life. So I guess I really can't answer that question either. So that's me for now. Okay, cheers.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. Marianne?
Yeah, I think the first question is really important in terms of internal democracy, and I that's where I get beat up a lot in the NDP because I'm continually pressing for, to address the centralization of power, to address the loss of party committees or any kind of party newspaper and party lists, access to, names of people, then this whole trend towards a sort of an ideology of power that is anti-activist. And there is that dynamic going on in the party between people who are staff in unions and in the party, and then people who are activists and who want to organize as activists and engage people in policy discussion and organizing. And, so that has to be a real focus. And I think we need new tools for that. As I said earlier, I think we are using very cumbersome, clunky democratic methods and tools and procedures and structures. And there's a lot of innovation in the whole area of community development. And, there's a lot to be learned from understanding some of the work in public health around trauma informed and those, so that we understand how people internalize their understanding of power and their approach and the way that they define power and deal with power. And abuse of power. So I think that we have to really build our skills for analysis and understanding and sense making of what the experience that we're having. And that comes from, like Stephen was just saying, it's good to have dialogue. It's good to be able to listen to other people and share our lived experience and kind of make sense of what we're experiencing, and then to also really build our skills at organizing. And we have all these amazing tools. We have the web, we have social media, and everyone's got a phone. And that's why I'm so excited about this movement of the climate activists to get behind, and others obviously, to sign up 10,000 members. I mean, they scared the shit out of the party establishment. You did a great job, Stephen, whoever was involved with that, to sign up 10,000 members, almost double the party membership. It's remarkable. And to me, that's what we need to be doing, is building those skills to do that kind of organizing, and insist that, we flatten, we decentralize these structures so that it is more grassroots, and we have things like citizens' assemblies, we have a more participatory public engagement, and that we actually have structures where we come to agreement, that it's not a vote and then the losers go and you don't get anything, but we actually move from this kind of debate to dialogue and decision making, so that we're coming to agreements where people, everyone can feel like their interests are going to be addressed, and not have these winner takes all kind of systems where, then the way that it was manipulated now with candidates being screened out and disqualified because they were going to win. She was going to win. That's why she was disqualified. And it's a sad comment on the lack of democracy. And, and some of these other questions, I think, looking at, I guess, the World Health Organization, maybe some of the concerns there are, I don't know if it's to do with COVID and the restrictions around COVID, if that's what people are referring to. But I'm really interested in being part of organizations that are going to politicize people and work to organize people. And it's not just having members that don't do anything, in any kind of an organization, but that are very engaged. And I think we have to use I think that we need to use film more. I'm part of this program right now with Margaret Atwood called Practical Utopias, and it's about using fiction and film to help people imagine a different world and imagine how we create that world. So, those are some interesting kind of things that I do when I need a break from politics. Work with artists and people that are actually trying to really envision how we get to that better world that we all want.
Okay, thank you. Okay, folks, we're going to go into the last round of questioning, and there's been quite a few questions come up tonight, but we only have so long on our program, but we're going to try to put 5. Yes, you heard it, 5 questions.
Do you not
in the
want me to
chat?
answer? Do you not want me to answer those
Yeah,
questions?
Oh, I'm sorry, Barry. I'm sorry. No, I guess I didn't. Sorry about that. Go ahead. Go ahead.
It's not only in the NDP that democracy is at risk. Okay, again, some terrific questions. Thank you very much to those who contributed. I want to agree strongly with a point that Marianne made repeatedly, and that is about identity politics. It tends to ignore class politics. I think that's very important. We know identity politics comes from special oppression, that those who are adversely affected speak the bitter truth about, but it can't be resolved unless you go to the root of it. And, discrimination is profitable. That's the point. There's profit to be made by subordinating people and oppressing people and making life miserable for them because of their special circumstances or identity or gender or sexual orientation, as the case may be. But the working class is the most intersectional phenomenon on earth. Inside the working class are all of the identities and all of the oppressions. And when we find a way to unite, we can overcome oppression, but we need to change the system. Otherwise, any progress we make is vulnerable to being rolled back, eviscerated, negated, eliminated. So thank you, Marianne, for making that point. I take it to that extent. Democracy in the NDP to prevent disastrous policies. Well, yes, there's a reason why the NDP brass, the NDP bureaucrats, do not allow socialist policies onto the convention floor for debate. And it's not just because they don't like the policies, it's because they think that they'll be adopted. And we've seen this over and over. I mean, even to the extent that, in Ontario, the NDP convention has repeatedly opposed public funding of Catholic separate schools, for public auto insurance, which I think you still enjoy in Manitoba, maybe see, and free post-secondary education. And then the moment these policies are adopted, the NDP leaders say, well, we're here to govern for all of the population and not just for the interest groups within the party who advocate this resolution. Therefore, we're going to ignore it. So, in order to prevent such embarrassments, they just don't let the radical policies come to the convention floor at all. Simple. Or they bury them. They have 5 or 6 policy areas. You have about 40 or 50 resolutions in each. And the socialist policies are at the bottom of each of the 5 or 6 topical lists. That's how they, so to prevent disastrous policies and also to facilitate pro-worker policies, we need greater democracy in the NDP. But there's one more reason, a very important reason. Workers need to have the opportunity to become accustomed to self-governance. And only by taking their destiny in their own hands, it's starting with their party and starting with their defensive economic organizations, the unions, people have a chance to learn how to be self-governing and to set the agenda for their own interests. The risk of a conservative majority, if we press for radical policies, I think that was the sense of the question. Well, I mean, there's no telling what will happen. There could be a landslide vote in favor of the radical socialist policies we advocate. So let's not sell ourselves short. But Eugene Debs, who is an idol of mine, great railway workers leader and socialist who fought World War I, putting from behind bars, he said, it's better to fight for what you want and not get it than to fight for what you don't want and get it. So lesser evil politics, I think, is something we should absolutely reject. I mean, of course, you can be ultra left, you can demand the moon and not communicate with the working class electorate. That is just as big an error. But our policies can be communicated in very simple, basic terms appealing to the interests of people and making sure the corporations pay for all of the things that we need and that we have been systematically denied. Social democracy, does it equal social imperialism? Well, yes, when the workers' movement agrees to colonization and imperialist war and super exploitation of our sisters and brothers who live abroad. That's social imperialism. And Marx addressed this in two ways. He referred to social democracy and the Dutch colonies in Indonesia over a century ago. And he said that, you know, the notion that Europe has a civilizing influence in the less developed countries is anathema. We have to share what we've learned and learn from the indigenous people of the continents of the world and bring together the best of all and to meet human needs. So Marx said that's social imperialism. And he also referred to Ireland. And he said, as long as Ireland is unfree, the workers of Britain will never be free. So again, liberation is not, it's not an extravagance. It's not an option. It's a life and death question, because if we don't fight for the freedom of our sisters and brothers everywhere, we'll end up supporting war credits and armies to go and crush them because they're fighting for their freedom, for their existence. And that's something that's really, really important for us to take to heart. How to prevent the World Health Organization from controlling our lives? Well, I agree with the other panelists. There's no risk of the WHO controlling our lives. The risk is to science. Science is at risk at the hands of the greedy corporations. Corporations that wanted workers to go to work even when the risk was high, even when they're sick. So many workers in the meatpacking plants of Alberta died because they were in unhealthy, congested conditions, and the corporations didn't give a friggin' damn about it as long as they could reap big profits. So the problem is not the WHO, the problem is corporate stranglehold on the economy and on our health and safety at home and in the workplace. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Barry. So now we will go back to our producer, and this time it's going to be 5 questions because we're trying to get them all in if possible. You will have up to 7 minutes to answer, you know, whatever you want from 5. And the lineup will be Marianne first, and then Stephen, and then Barry. So Dave, the 5 questions, please.
Yeah. So the first question comes from Elizabeth Bice. What does the Socialist Caucus propose for the NDP and for society? The second question is, does the NDP leadership take an anti-war position around the Ukraine? Why or why not? The third question is, how do we get socialists into the NDP leadership? The fourth question is regarding the BC NDP disqualification of Appadurai. Could Stephen elaborate on his comment, train has left the station, too late to stop? And I encourage others to comment on that situation as well. And the fifth question is, why did Jagmeet Singh recently speak out for Palestinian rights, although in a limited way?
Okay, you have up to 7 minutes, Marianne. You're muted, Marianne.
Sorry about that. For the first one, I don't really know what the Socialist Caucus proposes for the NDP in term, like, I mean, I understand a socialist agenda, but if it's like I'm not really clear on what the Socialist Caucus is doing other than these webinars and meetings and, you know, trying to get people on to have slates and those kinds of things. I'm really big on organizing in neighborhoods. I'm you know, I think working at the constituency level is important, and really working in where people live in their neighborhood. So, and then also doing really neighborhood issue organizing. And that's, I think, you know, finding the issues that people care about where they live and organizing people around those issues. And that's how people get politicized too. They learn the skills, they learn how their experience is reflected to in these larger systems that we live in, which are, you know, oppressive and collapsing. Unfortunately, the NDP does not seem to be taking an anti-war position anywhere. I talked about that already, where they were forced to capitulate to the Ukrainian Canadian Congress, which is what's also, I think, feeding a lot of the media stories. And and it's tricky because, like we've already said, Putin is also an imperialist. Putin is also a warmonger, but NATO and the United States are in the business of making wars because their economy is that's how they run their economy. So it's I think imperative that the NDP talk about the history and the truth about what's going on and challenge the media representation and insist that the media not cover stories in a biased way. Like, I stopped listening to Ian Hadamansing and Cross Country Checkup because it was so biased. And anyone that got on to tried to ask a question from a peace position, and it's not like you're accused of supporting Putin and Russia, but there is a peace position here of insisting that there be negotiation and that the United States and other countries not continue to prevent negotiation for a peace settlement. I recently started looking at the Treaty of Versailles, which is negotiated at the end of World War II. It took 6 to 8 months to negotiate that. And I'm like, why don't we just skip the war and negotiate a peace agreement? And, and not only a peace agreement, but how we demilitarize the economy, how we get rid of nuclear weapons, how we stop investing all of this money wasted in resources wasted, the human lives wasted. It's just madness. And there's a whole power analysis around that as well. Getting socialists into the leadership of the NDP, well, I mean, there are a few candidates. Like, I worked very hard to get Leah Gazan nominated, and she ran as a socialist. And I'm not sure what kind of pressure was brought to bear on her on in different issues, but we just have to organize. That's how we get anything, is we organize and we build relationships and partnerships, and that's how we do that. I'm really interested to hear Stephen's answer on. I mean, to me, the train is left because all those members are now in the party and they can organize within the party, and I hope they do. And they can do some of the things that we're talking about in some of these other questions. And I don't know why Jagmeet Singh has spoken out recently about Palestine. There's all sorts of pressures going on, meetings all the time. I can't answer that question. So hopefully that's helpful, but and it's really too bad in some ways that we're doing this, like what Stephen was saying. Like, I don't know how many people are on the call. I don't know. Like, it would be good to have this be a bit more of an iterative kind of discussion. The Q&A is kind of limiting, because I would like to hear what other people in the audience think about some of these things. But
Sorry,
anyway.
this is the format of the webcast. So, Stephen?
Hi there. Just give me a second here. So, I think Barry would probably be better at answering the idea of the plans that the Socialist Caucus have for the NDP and society. I just think that in general, what we're working towards is, pure socialism, where workers have control over the economy and political and economic power, basically. So rather than the bourgeoisie. As number two, the NDP anti-war position. Well, the unfortunate thing is, in some ways, it is unfortunate. War is popular. People get really excited about things whenever people are being killed, and it's really hard to fight against that. And I think Jagmeet and the NDP want to be popular as well, so they align themselves. There's also the pressure from the United States, whether we like it or not, and that's something that definitely shows up in our media, in Western media. So all of a sudden you've got this whole population that's way into war because, man, that's we talked about a little bit about the entertainment of news, and war is very entertaining. Let's face it, that we make movies out of wars. It's crazy, but there's something about the human condition that we're drawn towards that kind of life and death drama. And whenever you have that so popular, and when it's over and over again in the media, the political leadership responds to it. So that's what I would say there. Anyway, I mean, it's ridiculous, but it appeals, I guess, to baser human instincts, if you will. Maybe we're just happy to. No, I shouldn't. No, I will not go there. Okay. How do we get socialists into the NDP leadership? As Marianne said, organize, organize, organize. And we do have a few examples of that, but there are a lot of problems because what you end up with is the NDP is dominated by huge unions who are not socialists. I don't even know whether you could call them democratic socialists. They're all about maintaining their power rather than using it. And whenever you have leadership that is like that, and whenever they dominate a political party, and now whenever we have this vetting system, actually, I was a victim of the vetting. I was asked to run in the last election federally, and I went through this ridiculous process where they were asking me to take down things like the Pride Society here in White Rock, asked to use one of the Catholic Church facilities. And so I put this on my website as or my Facebook page as being, oh, and the Catholic Church turned them down. They said no, you can't use the facility. So I put that down as one of the things that was wrong. They wanted me to take down that post because what about the Catholic vote? And I'm thinking most Catholics, are okay with LGBTQ plus. So I mean, it's just, the other thing was about I spoke out about the SNC Lavalin scandal and what happened with Jody Wilson-Raybould. They wanted me to take that down. I said that there should not be any subsidies for fossil fuel industry. They wanted me to take that down. So we can organize, but it's very hard whenever you have this tight control in the center of the party. It's no longer electoral district associations, and it's questionable whether it ever really was deciding who they want locally to run. So it's going to be a fight, but if we can get rid of the leadership up there, maybe we've got a chance. Okay, and then yes, I think Marianne really started on number 4 here about what I mean by that train has left the station. They've tried to keep it quiet. They don't want anyone to know about it. Sorry, but it's out there in the public and it's hurting them really badly, as it should. The Liberals and the Greens are taking the NDP to task for being the no Democratic Party. Everyone knows it. So they're in big trouble right now, and they should be. If we can maintain this the membership, a good portion of that membership, we have a possibility of turning this party around. And so that's what I mean by the train has left the station. It's already out there in the public. What are they going to do with it? You can't put it back. It's going down the track, and hopefully we can guide it to the proper destination. Why did Jagmeet speak out about Palestinian rights? Well, as I recall, in the last AGM, we managed to get to the floor a resolution about Palestine, and it passed. So this really is where it puts him in a spot where, my goodness, it's only taken him what, like a year or more to actually say something about it. And then, so this is something that yeah, I think that's the biggest reason. Somehow he's trying to bridge I don't know whether it's his personal feeling or whatever, his political sense with what it is that the party has wanted. And yeah, that's it. Thank you for those great questions.
Thank you. Okay, Barry.
Again, some great questions and just a bit of time to touch on those questions. What does the Socialist Caucus want? We want everything. We want class struggle policies. We want class struggle leadership. That means the leaders don't get paid any more than the workers that they represent, and that they're subject to recall, and that they are true to the policies that are adopted by the party, even if they're not socialist policies. We have to work through that and reflect what the workers want. So what do we do as a Socialist Caucus? We run candidates at elections in the NDP. We run for executive at the local level, at the provincial level, at the federal level. We run as many candidates as we can. We cooperate with other tendencies in the NDP left who want to stand candidates. We try to get them to adopt our policies, and I'll talk about the policies in a moment, and to advocate industrial action to confront the government's biased and anti-democratic and anti-worker policies. We agitate for general strike, and we're at demonstrations with the Socialist Caucus banner, along with other leftist organizations. We don't hide our light under a bushel. We're very open, and sometimes other groups on the NDP left say that makes them uncomfortable. Well, sorry, but there's a lot at stake. We need to change the society radically. And anything less than radical change means that we're not going to make it. We're not going to survive as a species and with nature intact. So some of the policies we advocate, pandemic measures are urgently needed. We say extend the public healthcare system to include long-term care, medical drugs, research, development, and delivery of vaccine to combat COVID-19, nationalize big pharma, expropriate the private for-profit nursing homes and seniors' residences, operate them under the democratic control of their workers and the families of residents, end the overcrowding and unsanitary conditions, hire more frontline staff, provide job security, and double their pay. That's just in terms of healthcare. And we could talk about a government, building the millions of homes that are needed in the society. Venezuela could do it. Why can't Canada? End the gouging of consumers by giant telecoms like Rogers, Telus, and Bell, reduce interest rates, operate the industry as a public service, Green New Deal, tax the corporations, defund and disarm and disband the RCMP, cancel the new fighter jets. So the policies are easy to find on the Socialist Caucus website, very easy to find. Jagmeet Singh on Palestine. This is a triumph and a tragedy at the same time. Stephen is right to remind us that at the last NDP federal convention, we were able to get this policy on the floor. How that happened, I mean, the bureaucrats thought they had control of this convention, but somehow it squeaked through, and we debated it, and that policy said no more weapons sales to the Zionist state, no trade with corporations on the occupied territories. And it took Jagmeet, a year and a half to articulate the policy, but what's the limitation? This was not put on the NDP website. This was not stated at a news conference. This was not a message to all NDP members. This was just told to the people who had been agitating for it, including some of the social justice groups and Palestinian rights organizations to which Socialist Action is affiliated, like BDS Cross Canada Coalition. So it was a concession that Jagmeet Singh said anything at all positive about Palestinian rights, but still does not call for tearing down the apartheid wall, does not call for, ending arms sales to the Zionist state as a whole, does not call for full justice for the Palestinian people in the form of a democratic and secular Palestine. Ukraine, well, the NDP position is not anti-war, it's pro-war. not just because the NDP refuses to echo the policy it adopted in the 1970s, Canada out of NATO. Yes, that's actually an NDP policy. It was never defeated by vote. It was just sunset, sunrise, sunset, and the policy disappeared. But the NDP advocates more ships and more jets and more military equipment to Ukraine in order to feed the flames of war. Even on Haiti, Canada does not demand Canada get out of the core group. Now, what is the core group? That's Germany, France, United States, Canada, one or two others, and the UN and the EU that have been choosing the president of Haiti for the last number of years. And now that there's conflict between gangs and the Haitian police, Canada sends armed military equipment. They'll probably send troops as part of a UN occupation. Once again, this has been going on. Haiti was occupied between 1915 and 1935 by US troops, which appointed all the administrations. Haiti was the first free black colony in the world. They defeated Napoleon's armies, and the United States and the racist regimes of the Northern Hemisphere forced Haiti to pay reparations to France for stolen property. Guess what? The property was the slaves who were liberated. They were forced to pay for their own flesh and blood, their own people. This legacy continues, unfortunately, and the NDP can't find a way to speak openly for the liberation process. The foreign affairs critic of the NDP said, well, we should listen to what the Haitian the Haitian residents of Canada say. Well, what they say is, Canada, get the hell out, quit the core group, and stop funding the dictatorship and milking Haiti dry. That's what they're saying. How to get socialists into the NDP leading positions? Again, I kind of covered this. Don't want to repeat. You run candidates. And we have been successful. Dirka Prout from London North was elected chair of the federal NDP Women's Committee. She did an excellent job. This was 2 or 3 conventions ago. And then at the next convention, the NDP brass ran a candidate against Dirka. This woman had no participation in the NDP Federal Women's Committee whatsoever. She was just propped up as a candidate to defeat Dirka. And Dirka has been a candidate for the NDP in federal and provincial elections. She's very well spoken. We have to run candidates as open socialists, and we can win when we do. Other groups in the NDP NDP left often run on soft left policies. They have a right to do what they want. We argue for genuine socialist policies. Capitalism is threatening the destruction of nature and humanity. There's no time to dither. We need to speak openly about the conflict between profit and nature. The way corporations simply offload their garbage into nature, threatening the destruction of all in order to maximize their profits. We need to talk about nationalizing industry under workers, community, and indigenous control. We need a socialist revolution and a planned economy, not just for the sake of democracy, but for the sake of human survival. So I say, join the socialists, fight to win, and that includes fighting in the NDP and in the labor movement and in all the social movements. Bring together the forces that can put an end to this wasteful, destructive, and toxic system and replace it with something worthy of humanity. Thanks.
Okay, this brings us to the end of our show. So special thanks to Marianne, Barry, and Stephen, and to our technical producer, Dave Enning. And of course, a note that Barry Weisleder is also the political producer of the webcast. Please consider being a supporter of Socialist Action newspaper, which we will send to you online. To fill out the form, just visit our website, www.socialistaction.ca. If you'd like to talk to us about joining SA, please write to Socialist Action Canada at gmail.com or just call us at 647-986-1917. The show has been recorded and can be seen on the Socialist Action YouTube channel. The next webcast will be on Thursday, November the 3rd, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. The title is Palestine Resists, with Rana Abdullah in Winnipeg, Hannah Kawaz in Vancouver, and Stephen Ellis in Toronto. That's this Thursday, November the 3rd, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. The Zoom link is on the SA website. So, on behalf of our technical and political producer and myself, Elizabeth, your host, thanks for listening. Until next time, be safe, stay healthy, and stay active. Bye for now.